Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just be waiting a few minutes to allow everyone to come in before we start. For all of those that just joined, we'll be waiting approximately 2 minutes before we start to allow for everyone to join. A warm welcome to everyone. My name is Baljot Rai, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's workshop called COP26, Climate Change and Youth Action. First of all, some practical information. I would like to request everyone to keep their mics and videos off. If everyone could also switch to speaker view, that would be great. Please write any questions you have throughout the presentation in the Q&A box, and a time for questions will be given at the end of the presentation. Also, just a reminder that this session will be recorded and all recordings will be available on the VFirst platform for 3 months after this symposium. So today, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Rex Arevalo. He's an advocate for participatory climate action and integral ecology. In 2019, he participated in the first ever UN Youth Climate Summit as the Green Ticket recipient for the Philippines. He works with Eco-Jesuit in forwarding a global commitment for climate justice among Jesuits and collaborators. Without any further delay, I would like to hand over things to our presenter today. Thank you.
Thanks, Baljo. And is it good afternoon there in Canada? Hello from the Philippines. It's around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. over here. So apologies if sometimes I kind of lower my voice. Um, Hello, everyone. Kamusta? If there are any Filipinos in the audience, it's great to be here. Um, and I will just share my screen to kick things off. Okay. Baljo, just let me know if you're able to see it and if everything is okay.
Yep, looks good.
All right. Okay, so um, let's kick things off. So hello again, I'm Brex Arevalo from the Philippines, a 4-year now climate advocate. And today I will be giving a crash course on COP26 and how to take action. And these are just some thoughts from a former climate denier. Yeah, I used to be a climate denier a few years ago, but a lot of my experiences led me to change my views. So, first of all, please feel free to type in the chat box about these questions that I'll be spreading throughout the presentation. So, take a few seconds first. What comes to mind when you hear climate change? What images come to mind, sounds, words, concepts, everything else. Let's give about 5 seconds for that. Feel free to type in the chat box and I'll just go on and I'll just go along. So I think one of the first questions we have to answer when we're talking about COP is, well, when we're talking about climate change, why exactly is it a major issue? I'm sure we hear about this a lot in the news, on social media. Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future and other groups have been making a lot of noise about this. And I'm just jotting down here some points as I see it. It's affecting our food systems, our access to water. It affects biodiversity, economies, human rights, etc. It costs a lot of money. If a place is flooded, for example, that costs money to repair. It literally costs human lives. We're seeing this happening literally everywhere at this point. It used to be that it was mostly in the global south that you would feel the impacts of climate change, but nowadays you're also seeing it in the global north. A place that comes to mind for me is Germany. If you were listening to the news, I think a month or 2 months back, they were hit by a really, really devastating flood. Fourth point, it's unfair, and it's unjust. And in a lot of ways, it's very similar to the COVID crisis, because the COVID crisis is also arguably largely due to how we treat the environment, to our destruction of it. As you destroy the homes, the forests as you destroy the forests, which are home to many different species, which carry with them bacteria, microbes, viruses, what have you, that they are immune to, and then you destroy their homes, they go nearer human settlements, that makes us exposed to the microbes and bacteria that they are carrying. Okay, just here's a little snapshot of annual CO2 emissions. I think this was, pardon me for not putting in the year, but I think this was 2019. And basically what you're seeing here is that the deeper the red, the more CO2 they're emitting. So for example, some of the top emitters based on this map are the USA, are countries like China, Australia, and you'll notice that some of the areas over here, notably Africa, emit the least. So going back to the question earlier of why is this important? Well, that leads to the question of questions of justice, questions of inequality. Usually you will hear protesters say, how come developing countries bear most of the burden when it comes to climate change, when developed countries are the ones who emit the most? This is a snapshot of the world's top 10 greenhouse gas emitters, with China leading the pack, US coming in second, India coming in third. And I think over there, number 9 is Canada, emitting roughly 1.6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm just going through a brief background on climate change, then we'll get to COP. So what are the general approaches in responding to climate change? I'm listing here 3. First is climate mitigation, which is basically reducing greenhouse gases from going into the atmosphere. Examples of that are forests, because they suck in the carbon. Switching to renewable energy sources is also an example, because you're limiting the amount of CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. So instead of fossil fuels, for example, you're using renewables. Second one is climate adaptation, which is adjusting to anticipated climate change related impacts. This involves things like disaster risk reduction policies. What do you do when, let's say, a typhoon hits, a storm hits? Another one is upgrading infrastructure. A notable thing there, I think, is that Canada recently released I believe it was something like 700+ page federal government report, basically saying that Canada is not ready to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And one of the examples that they gave was that infrastructure was designed for temperatures of the past. But now you have temperatures that are rising, so infrastructure has to adjust, it has to change. Now, a third one here, and I think this one might not be familiar to most of you, is the concept of loss and damage. Now, this one, let's just call this unofficial, quote unquote, because it's still being defined. It's fairly new. And basically what this means is loss and damage is what happens after climate impacts happen. So, for example, climate change related impacts happen. So this is something that happened. This is a post impact response. Now, just to give an example here, recently, I think it was early 2021. I forget if it's the government of Nigeria or the local government of Nigeria. But of the local government of Nigeria, one of the local governments there, they won a case against Shell, a major fossil fuel company, because Shell basically damaged their whole ecosystem for decades. Now, what they did was they filed the case in court, and then the result of that, after a grueling 10 years of processing, was basically Shell had to pay them a certain amount of money for loss and damage, for their loss and damage accountabilities. So that's an example of loss and damage. We'll breach that topic again a little later. So here you go. So basically, what is the Conference of Parties, or COP? And these are basic points. COP is the annual United Nations Climate Change Conference. It brings together 192 parties, which are made up of 191 countries plus the European Union. And they make up what you call the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC for short. Basically, this is the United Nations entity that is tasked with facilitating, organizing, bringing together all of these countries and the European Union in terms of climate change. Now, the first one was held all the way back in 1995 in Berlin, in Germany. And another point I would like to make is that it was in 2015, in the 21st COP, that the Paris Agreement was signed. Now, back in 2015, I believe this was in Paris, there was the aim of limiting global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius. But as we'll see a little bit later, that target has now been changed to 1.5 degrees, indicating that we need to shape up. Basically, we need to shape up. So at this point, please do let me know in the chat box if, or Baljo, let me know in the chat box if anyone has any questions, if I'm being clear. Otherwise, I'll just continue. Okay.
That's good.
Now, why is COP26 a very critical event? We've had 25 COPs in the past. How come this one seems to be gaining more traction than others? Well, it's a lot of reasons. One of which is what I've already mentioned, is that it seems like we need to really shape up. We need to ramp up our efforts even more. According to a recent report by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are not on track to achieving our goals. And I think it was in July that they released a report. I think the short term for it is the IPCC AR6 report. And it's a scientific report, it's hardcore science, which says that we're really slow on progress on meeting the Paris Agreement guidelines. And at this point, we need to aim for 1.5 degrees instead of 2. Now, an important term I would like to introduce here is that of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. And a way of thinking about this is that these are the country plans to implement the Paris Agreement. So globally, you have the Paris Agreement. Countries say, okay, let's do this. And in order to implement that, each country is tasked with making its own NDC based on the Paris Agreement. Now, I think over 190 countries at this point have passed, which is pretty much everyone. And according to the trends in the NDCs, we're just not being ambitious enough. And as it stands, we're on track to 3 degrees Celsius of warming or more. That's double the target, which is 1.5. Now, another slide here on why COP26 is a critical event, and it's that we're living right now in a time of what I would call global change. You have COVID, which is really shaking up the world. And you have what people are calling social tipping points. Basically, these are the different movements happening around the world. These are the on the ground up organizings that people are facilitating in response to what's happening. It's in response to climate change. It's in response to the COVID crisis, because we are now feeling the effects of climate change, not just in the global south again, but also in the global north. Developed countries, developing countries, nowadays it doesn't really matter. Now, another point here is, and I do believe this to be true, and it's that climate change is not just for the experts to decide on. It's not just for the scientists. It's not just for the government leaders, but it's also something that is energized by social commitment. It's energized by people. The dialogue, the um, the policy priorities, civil society has a large role to play in this. They have a large role in contributing to a shift towards greater climate action. So, who exactly are going to COP26? Now, there are basically two broad groups that I would like you to know. One are the Blue Zone participants, which basically consists of government leaders and representatives, although they do have, let's say, they do invite some people from non-government also as, let's say, consultants. And this is where formal negotiations and decisions are actually made. I think Prime Minister, if I have it listed down there, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was going, President Joe Biden and others. And then you have the green zone. This is where a lot of the social action happens, because this is where non-government leaders and representatives join. Civil society, indigenous communities, youth-led groups, faith-based organizations. Now, you have these two different zones. And there are a lot of questions about these zones because usually green zone participants are left out of the blue zone. And remember, the blue zone is where the decisions are really made. Not to say that the green zone doesn't have its merits, but I believe going forward, there has to be a clearer merging of the two. So at this point, I think Baljo people can unmute if they want, but I'd like you to reflect a little bit about this question, maybe give it 30 seconds to a minute. Who is responsible and who should be held accountable for climate change impacts? Feel free to type in the chat box there. And just so you know, I cannot see the chat box on my screen. So please, Valjo, just let me know if anyone is typing. If anyone wants to say anything, please do unmute and you're welcome to share. So let's give that 30 seconds to a minute.
We do have a few answers.
Yeah.
They mainly go around the same belief of everyone, humanity, and as we all have to make choices that serve our planet.
Great.
And there is an answer saying that every person should have some responsibility, but ultimately government and industry must.
That's a great answer. Okay, so great. So I think it's clear everyone has a responsibility, but of course there are some who, let's say, have more responsibility than others because they are the ones who are contributing the most to these impacts. Now, before I continue, are there any other questions or anything that the audience wants to share? Is everything, all the jargon and all the terms and stuff that I've been introducing, are they clear? Okay, if no one's gonna ask, I'm gonna go ahead. The next part might be a little bit more technical and it might look like a lot, but I promise you, it's a little easier once I explain it. Things will connect. So, okay. Now, we know that COP is a problem. I mean, we know that climate change is a problem. Now, what are the main agenda points at COP26? How are people trying to respond to the climate crisis? Now, first point here, and I have 7 points. First point here is the finalization of the Paris Agreement rulebook. Yes, believe it or not, it's been 6 years since we signed the Paris Agreement, and there still is no rulebook. And you can imagine every year, so 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, we've had a COP, and the Paris Agreement rulebook was talked about, but people cannot decide on how to run it. So this has been a real doozy because it's really stalled progress. And a lot of this has affected the NDCs. Again, the NDCs are the nationally determined contributions, the country plans of each country. And just to illustrate, over in the Philippines, we had some discussions around the NDCs. The government, when they were forming it earlier this year, they opened up discussions for civil society to comment. And because there's no agreement in the Paris, there's no a rule in the Paris Agreement rulebook that you have to have, let's say, these categories. Basically, the Philippines was just, okay, let's use this category, let's use this category, let's use this category. Now, what happened was, if you believe it or not, forests were not considered in the NDC. So, but after some civil society clamor and hammering onto the government, eventually they included forests into the NDC. So the thing that happens here when you don't have agreement on what an NDC actually consists of, some countries may just opt to make it however, or design it however they want to. So it's really important to have these guidelines so that people are guided, and that everyone is in agreement as to what to do. So, finalization of the Paris Agreement rulebook. Next one is to create more inclusive spaces for planning, decision making, nationally, regionally, and globally. Many people are often left out of these decision making processes. You know, just for example, when people talk about the UN, for I would say 99% of people in the world, they're like, wow, UN. So how do I get involved in that? It's like a totally different world for most people. Another point I'd like to make is that COP is often inaccessible to people in developing countries. Just as an example, now, COP this year is held in the UK, developed country. Now, as a developed country, most of the expenses included, let's say if you make a trip there, are fairly pricey for others. Let's say also for here in the Philippines, those are fairly pricey. Hotel prices are expensive, transport is expensive, I have to fly all the way there. So you have all of these logistical concerns, you have all these barriers to access that those in developing countries, those who are most vulnerable to climate impacts, experience. So there's a real push for more inclusive spaces. Another one is to integrate human rights into climate solutions, into policies, into frameworks. Now, there have been a lot of pushes, a lot of little, I wouldn't say a little, but a lot of interweaving processes around human rights and climate change. One of them is the establishment of the Human Rights Rapporteur for climate change. And basically what this does is the UN Special Rapporteur has the responsibility of basically hearing out from different groups, different people, how is climate change affecting your human rights? And the rapporteur gathers all of that information, and it becomes formal input into UN processes and decision making. Another example is something that my former boss was involved in, and it was led by the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, which explored the question of whether major fossil fuel companies, major carbon emitters, can be held accountable for the violation of human rights of Filipinos. And it heard from a number of different countries. And I remember very vividly one of the testimonies of a Filipino farmer that really struck me was yung pagsasaka naging payak na lang, naging sugal na lang siya. Translated, that means farming has become a gamble for us. So farmers can no longer predict the weather patterns. They can no longer accurately across time say, okay, I'll plant here, this is my planting season, etc. Now, fourth agenda point is to mobilize 100 billion US dollars every year in climate finance from developed countries, from the richer countries, to the developing countries. And this has been going on since the signing of the Paris Agreement. This was one of the provisions there. And basically, this can be thought of not as the rich giving to the poor, or like let's call it a messiah complex, but rather it's thinking about the developed countries as being accountable for all the climate change related impacts that they are contributing to. Now, there are two broad problems when it comes to mobilizing this climate finance. One of which is we're not there yet at the 100 billion. Some countries are not giving what they are supposed to give. Another one is that a lot of people don't actually know how to access this climate finance. So, just as an example, I've been an advocate for climate change, for climate action for the past 4 years. It was only this year actually that I found out, oh, there's such a thing as climate finance. So I don't know anyone, at least within my immediate circle, who knows how to access it. So that's another question. How do you get this stuff accessible to those on the ground who experience the climate change impacts? And another thing to think about is, how do you help these communities write up proposals, which are often technical, submit these proposals for the finance, and go through the whole shebang of project management, of reporting, of monitoring the project, etc. Last point here, very important, that that this climate finance is afforded to developing countries, not as loans, but as grants. Because otherwise, people will get stuck in a cycle of debt. And that's not going to be any good. Excuse me for a second. Grants will really help, and it will help empower them to move faster. Fifth point, shifting the more sustainable energy sources and policies toward net zero economies. This basically refers to phasing out fossil fuels. And the term just transition is a little, was making waves, I think, a few years ago. And I'm not sure if the term has shifted, but I think it basically refers to when we're shifting out of fossil fuels that we're doing it in such a way that it's in phases. It makes sure that people are still having access to energy despite the phasing out. Because if you move too fast, maybe you don't have energy for some, let's say for some time period you don't have energy. So it's phasing out fossil fuels in a just phasing out of fossil fuels in a just way. It's taking into consideration also human rights, because for example, let's say you put a windmill farm somewhere, that takes land, and more often than not, marginalized people, marginalized groups, indigenous people are pushed away from their lands in order to put up a development. So it's taking those things into consideration. Just to point out there, net zero, what that essentially means is per country, per economy, that every time you're emitting carbon, emitting greenhouse gases, you have measures that cancel out those emissions. So it's a plus and minus, it's a balancing out of what you emit and what you prevent or what you take out of the atmosphere. Sixth point, we're almost there to seventh. Sixth point is ensuring businesses are accountable for loss and damage. Again, loss and damage, those are the impacts that happen because of climate change. Now, a lot of, as we pointed out earlier, a lot of these communities that are affected, they do deserve justice. They do deserve compensation for what has happened to them. The example of Nigeria weighing a case against Shell is really good. It happened earlier this year. And I'd like to point out that there's a network that's trying to facilitate all of this, and it's the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage. Now, what the Santiago Network basically does, and it's a new organization, so it's still kind of getting its footing, is it's facilitating discussions, it's facilitating the needs and matching those needs of countries with what they need in terms of loss and damage. So for example, talks with the Santiago Network, talks with countries A, talks with countries B, and says, okay, what do you need? Let's help get you the loss and damage responses that you need. So part of that also is finance. Part of that is capacity building. Okay, down to the last point. Last one is to integrate nature-based solutions into the Paris Agreement rulebook, into NDCs, and to other mechanisms. Now, nature-based solutions, that's essentially that means instead of taking the technology route, instead of saying, okay, let the market lead, you're approaching climate action by regenerating nature, by letting nature take its course, by protecting it. And a lot of that does fall on the hands of indigenous communities who do primarily learn this through their culture. A lot of people are saying indigenous communities are the real the real guardians of the environment, and for good purpose. Number one, they're based on their culture, they are really connected with the land, they are connected with the waters. It's their home. It's something, NBS is something that they learn in culture, which is why sometimes in my group, in Eco Jesuit, we refer to these as culture-based rather than nature-based. They are doing this with what we call a sense of care and relationship. It's viewing nature as a part of them, not as some external entity. Okay, clear so far? One example of nature-based solutions vis-a-vis culture-based solutions. This was in 2019 in the mountains of the Philippines in the south. Now, over there on the left, you have some of the youth from the indigenous group over there in Bendum in the Philippines. And, excuse me, and what they did in September 2019, in solidarity with the UN Climate Summit that happened in New York, was they said, okay, maybe we can have our own little summit over here. They invited the mayor, they invited youth leaders from different villages in the area, and they had a dialogue. They talked about how they might protect the forest, how they might regenerate the forest, how they as indigenous peoples might communicate what's happening there to others in the city. One thing to note is that this area used to be a logging site. And then back in the 90s, regeneration efforts happened. So now the area is well known as one of the most forest dense areas in the region. Any questions so far? Anything you want to share? Are the points clear? Do any of the points, do you think that they make sense to you? Do they relate to your own context and experience? Bajo, could you please help me facilitate here?
Yeah, so as of right now, we don't have any questions, but if anyone does, they can enter them through the chat.
Okay, let's give it a few seconds maybe. If anyone also wants to speak, I think people can switch on their mics.
Seems like we're doing okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So, what do we do now? Remember, a lot of the energy around climate action comes from the youth. Wait, let me move forward. Example A is Greta Thunberg. So let's backtrack a little. Now, let's give some examples from Canada. Now, remember, I'm not an expert in Canada. This is just some stuff that I have dug up. So please do feel free to correct me on anything if there's something here that you think is erroneous. Now, these are just some points that I've dug up on what Canada is doing in relation to climate change. First is that the federal government just is enacting some net zero policies. And I encourage everyone to try to hold your officials accountable in implementing them. We talked about climate adaptation measures earlier, and we talked about that 700+ page federal report. One of my favorite things that I found out was that Canada's environment minister, together with Germany, has been tasked with corralling climate finance. So it's trying to ramp up climate finance for developing countries. Another thing, this was amusing for me, is that the Magpie River in Quebec was recently given legal personhood. And that basically means, okay, this river has rights. This river can be treated as a person, cannot be abused. One of the rights involved in this is the right to flow freely. So this is not an isolated incident where a body of water, a forest has been given legal personhood. Other rivers in other parts of the world have been given legal personhood, and it does afford them some rights. And I'd like to think that this basically is kind of like putting indigenous values onto paper, putting indigenous values into the framework of Western norms, so to speak, because this is viewing the river as a living entity, as something that people are in relation with. Related to that, of course, are the truth and reconciliation efforts happening in Canada. There was that recent explosion of news about students from the past, Indigenous children from the past who were abused, in their schools, who were not allowed, let's say, to speak their language, or else I forgot the punishments for it, but it was in the form of physical abuse if they speak their language. It was something like culture side, if you could call it that. Now, what can you do? And this, I really hope I can hear from some people in the audience. I think I heard from the organizers that some of you are taking action, so maybe later we can do a little sharing. These are just some points on some actions that you might be able to do. First, of course, is to join or lead advocacy efforts. It's very important to facilitate dialogues with people. Try to get marginalized people, Indigenous people to speak, for them to share their stories. More formally, if there are spaces for it, you might even be able to contribute to how your country's NDC is formed, or how maybe your city's climate change action plan is formed. So if there's an opportunity to join these discussions, to formally submit a contribution, I highly encourage you to do so. Another one, it might be in the context of a school, a university, or maybe in your communities, to organize some discussions around it. And it's important to invite multiple actors into that. An example that comes to mind is in Santa Clara University in California, and every April and every October of a given year, they have a range of activities around climate change. So it could be talks, it could be lectures in class, it could be a project competition in order to respond to climate change. And the beauty of this is that everyone is involved: staff, students, professors, nearby community members, organizations around the area. Everyone is gathering together around this. And as students, I do highly encourage you, third point, to conduct research around climate action or around sustainability if and when you can. And it's great if you're able to involve communities during the research process, because that means they're also involved in, it might also help in shaping their thoughts, might also help them form their own actions, their own ideas. And the picture of Greta. Now, these are points 4 and 5, and these are very specific to COP. You may want to know that it's the first time ever that green zone events, non-government events, are available online for people to join for free. It's on their YouTube. And what will happen is, I think it looks like this, if you look at that. What happens there is every day from November 1 to November 12 of COP, there will be a bunch of events happening, and you can pick and choose. Let's say I want to join this event on youth and climate action. Just sign up. Let's say I want to join an event on climate finance. Just sign up. Agriculture, just sign up. It's free. Usually this is really only restricted to people who are actually there at COP physically, but because of the changes and because of COVID and a lot of people can't go, the organizers have decided, okay, let's just let people join the events. So some participants will be there physically, and I hope many more will join online. Fifth point is to apply for special observer status. This is for access to the green zone. This is a little bit more technical. Now, one question might be, how exactly do you engage in COP? How do you get involved in COP? And this is the first step for most organizations. It's to get that thing called observer status. And what that requires is you have an organization with a legal entity. So it has a legal status. Let's say it's a corporation. It's legally recognized by your government. And you apply for that. You apply for it online. It takes about a year or more in some cases before you get approval. And once you get this observer status, you get access to COP. So the UNFCCC will say something like, okay, for COP27, for example, you can send 5 to 10 people to attend. That's basically how it goes. Okay. These are some other examples from the groups I'm involved with. Excuse me, let me take a sip. So I work with a group called Eco Jesuit, and it's this global network of Jesuits working with other communities, civil society, other faith-based organizations, working with the UN, in trying to promote promote collaboration around ecology. And these are some examples about what we're doing. Disclaimer, I'm not a Jesuit, but I do work with them. One was, we held a side event last July for the Asia Pacific Regional Climate Week, which contributed to COP. So this is the Asia Pacific Climate Week is part of regional consultations towards the global COP event. Right now, we're holding a hybrid physical and virtual global community pilgrimage, where we're basically inviting people to come with us and to join some events, to have some dialogues, to share stories, to campaign around COP online, and then some of us are actually going there to COP. This is another example, this time from Youth for Asia Pacific. These are examples of some of their demands based on their declaration. So at COP26, Pacific youth leaders demand, for example, to weave science and traditional environmental knowledge into designing ocean policies and management initiatives across all levels. Another is to operationalize and finance the Santiago network on loss and damage and distribute new loss and damage finances as grants, not loans. So if you remember, these are very related to the 7 points that I introduced earlier on. Okay, I think we're towards the end here. And I'd like to point out, remember, COP is just a step along the way. It's not the end point. We're not going to solve everything at COP26. But all of these COPs, they're part of a broader process. And as civil society, as people, as a community of people, we do have some social say, some social influence into what gets decided upon. So after COP, I hope that we can all take climate action and continue it beyond COP. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions, any reactions? I'll stop my share screen in a bit. Do I have anything else here? Nope. Okay.
Just a reminder that questions can be typed in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. And Rex, if you can see, we do have a few comments in the chat.
Okay. How do you do this? Baljo, are you going to facilitate the comments in the chat, or will people speak up? Yeah.
They're just mentioning some climate activists such as former MP Catherine McKenna, who worked tirelessly to promote and secure protection of the environment as the environment minister. She faced constant harassment and was nicknamed Climate Barbie, and also received a lot of backlash, especially from places where oil and gas industries are strongholds. And we have another example of Autumn Peltier, who is a youth environmental activist since she was very young. She is mainly known as a water protector, but as an Indigenous youth, she is active in protecting all aspects of the environment. So if anyone has any other comments or questions, please feel free to speak up or put them in the chat.
And just to comment maybe on what Marian shared, I'm remembering a question that is usually posed, and it's that, how come Greta Thunberg only appeared now? How come we don't have more Greta Thunbergs, let's say, in the more climate vulnerable areas? And there was a simple answer to that in one of the forums I attended. And it was that, well, in a lot of these countries, it's quite dangerous to speak up about climate. For example, here in the Philippines, it's quite dangerous to be an environmental defender. The harsh reality is that many of these environmental defenders experience death threats. Many of them are imprisoned, arrested. So it's very difficult. It's a different context over here. And I guess you could say it's kind of, it's a little fortunate that Greta is from Sweden, if I'm correct. Greta is from Sweden, and it might be a little safer for her to speak up. And because of all of the support that she's gained, you know, she's just firing on all cylinders now. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else like to share anything, or you have a question, anything you want to clarify? While waiting, I'll share some links in the chat box. Thank you, Marian. Thanks, Susanna. And just to plug in a little bit, that's the website for Eco Jesuit. Might be a little bit of a different flavor because it's faith-based, but we do have a lot of climate-related stuff going on there. Okay.
Also, for all those who are interested in climate issues or taking action against certain topics in the environment, the next plenary session, which starts at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, does also have many people involved who are climate activists and are taking action against climate issues. So I would definitely encourage everyone to attend.
Yeah. Okay. Bajo, is there a chance to get a picture, a screenshot real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, and I realize it's Sunday it's Sunday there, no? So thanks extra everyone for joining on a Sunday. If anyone wants to share any of your links, go ahead. I'd love to know about them.
So I believe that is it for today. For this workshop, I would like to thank all of the participants, as well as UBREX for your participation and dedication to becoming environmentally literate and taking action. So the next plenary session starts at 3:30. So until then, there's time for a little networking opportunity or to take a bit of a break from the screen before the next session. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And for you, Brex, I believe it's around, it must be very late there. Is it around 3 o'clock Monday morning?
Very early or very late, depending on how you look at it.
Indeed.
Okay. Will people need a copy of my presentation at some point? Will people need a copy of my presentation? Yeah. I just realized I didn't put any sources at the end, so I'm just
And reminder that
so yeah.
all workshops and plenary sessions that occurred during the symposium, there will be recordings available on the CGIV fairs for the next 90 days. And after that, they will be moved to the Canadian Jesuits International.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks, Ashish. Sasha.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Milky, thanks. Okay. All right. So are we all good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Bajo, Ashish, thanks so much. And yeah, if there's anything you need from me, any follow-up stuff, yeah, just send me an email, and I'll get to it as best I can.
Okay.
Okay. All right, ciao. Good night, and best of luck on the rest of the symposium.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Okay. Bye.